May those words be true as we repeat them and hold them in our heart. Thank you for that. So as always, the invitation is for us to take what resonates as our truth for today and leave the rest, maybe for another day or maybe for another person. So today we step into the seventh commandment: you shall not commit adultery. And we've landed on this seventh commandment, and by now I hope you realize that the words, or perhaps the way we were taught it in our youth, is just the surface of these 10 commandments, that there's so much more to them than what those words speak. You shall not commit adultery. Let's first visit Webster's to be clear about the definition of adultery. So when I open I still have a paper dictionary and it's big, so I open my dictionary and it says the first is the standard and customary thinking of adultery. Voluntary sexual relationship between a married person and someone other than their spouse. Well, that may be the definition that we've become accustomed to. To me, it felt rather limiting to go this whole word and focused only on one context of it, the act of physical intimacy. So I dug a little deeper, but the dictionary left me a little empty. So I went to Eric Butterworth, one of my favorites. And in Breaking the 10 Commandments, Eric Butterworth gives a rich explanation of adultery. And I want to use this so that we're all in the same starting point, that we all have the same foundation, and that we look at the same context of the word adultery. So from Latin, adultery comes from adulterate. And what that means is to debase, to deteriorate by adding something. Adultery is derived from the Latin adulterate. So to lower the quality or character or value of something. To pollute or to alter in some way. And from the Hebrew, adultery is abandoning the original principles. The word adultery is made of two Hebrew words. Add, A-D, to add, makes sense, right? And altery, it means other. So to add other, to add something and to alter the original form. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not debase, pollute, or abandon principles. So we go a little bit further. How many of us turn to that you shall not commit adultery and to mean that intimate relationship between a married person and a person who is not their spouse? We brush our hands, we make our opinions, create our judgments, because it all comes with judgment, and we go on our merry way. But there's more. And we may have been taught that first definition from our Victorian age, before the sexual revolution of the 1920s. Yes, that's when the sexual revolution really began, when the Victorian customs and mores started to fade and slip away. And of course, that sexual revolution was revived in the 70s and 60s. So as those Victorian ways faded, so did the meaning of adultery. So let's put all of that aside for just a moment as we look at this commandment: you shall not commit adultery. Let's look beyond the physical act and look to where the seed of the commandment begins. It begins the same place everything else begins, as a thought. Everything that we experience begins as a thought, right? And so does this. And we teach this, that life begins with our thoughts. We say we believe it. We recite it each Sunday as our third unity principle. Let's say it again. We are co-creators with God, actively creating our world through thoughts held in mind. It's not rote. It has deep, rich meaning. Does it not? And when we take it from the recitation of our principles to applying it to a commandment, it continues to grow in meaning. And through the activity and the power of our thoughts, we bring our life into existence. And with the wisdom of Eric Butterworth, we take a different perspective. Eric Butterworth says, whenever we see someone less than Christ, whenever we see less than the divine in another person or in ourselves, we commit adultery. Oh, I heard that. Huh. How often have you thought about that? We are debasing our divinity. We are lowering the quality of ourself or another. We are reducing the value of another being or ourself. We are minimizing the God presence, the divine, in everyone. Butterworth goes on to say, there's nowhere to hide. Who among us sees the divine in others and ourselves at all times? And there are no hands that go up. How often do we adulterate, debase, minimize the truth in our thoughts of the condition or experience or circumstances in our own lives, in the lives of others, in the life of the world? We minimize things. And remember Jesus' words in John 8? Men had gathered and were about to stone a woman who they had judged and condemned of committing adultery. And Jesus said, let the one who is without sin be the person to cast the first stone. Now, I want to sidebar, pause for a little public service announcement. It was men who were condemning a woman. Now, we might get on our high horse of feminist ideals, men versus women, patriarchy, and all of that, but there's more to it than that. Man is our masculine. Woman is our feminine. The masculine is the thinking nature of humanity. Feminine is the feeling nature of humanity. Both aspects are in each and every one of us. So when one part of ourself condemns the other part of ourself, we are committing adultery. We are minimizing. We are tearing down what is naturally us, the masculine and the feminine. So back to the story. It just needed to be said. So Jesus wasn't saying to all of these people who had gathered to stone the one they judged and condemned, he wasn't saying that they had all had extramarital relationships. Jesus likely meant the sins of the mind. And isn't that where our missing the mark begins? We don't act before we think. We say we do, oh, I acted before I thought. No, everything begins as our thinking. Be it good motivation or error motivation, it starts in our thinking. And Jesus just as easily could have said, according to Eric Butterworth, if anyone here is free from adulterating the divine truth of not seeing the sacredness, the divinity of others, let him stand and punish this woman. Couldn't have said that. Would have meant the same thing. So you shall not commit adultery. Every time we see another being as less than divine, we commit adultery. Every time we lessen our own values with I am not or I am too, we commit adultery. And there is no one exempt from this behavior. Thus Jesus said, whoever is without sin, whoever is without missing the mark, we fall short in seeing the divine in some others. We all have our person that taps our insecurities, that touches our bruises, that stirs sarcasm in us, and we hold thoughts and beliefs about ourselves as being less than, or not enough, or too much. So you shall not commit adultery. You shall not dilute or debase the reality of another by judging by appearances. You shall not. You shall not pollute what is pure, what is holy, and what is sacred. It seems to me that this perspective and this understanding is what inspired Jesus to welcome anyone of those who had gathered who was without sin, to be the one to throw that first stone. And what did the men do who had gathered? They quietly left and went on their way until Jesus stood alone with the woman, without condemnation, without judgment, without punishment, without guilt, without shame. Missing the mark in our own mind. And we can be guided by these words of Jesus when we answer honestly. Who has never minimized the truth of another? Who has never degraded another with judgmental words or thoughts or even actions? And who has never altered the self-worth of another or ourselves with condemnation? Let them stand and throw the first stone. I'm just going to sit over here quietly and humbly. Eric Butterworth beautifully points out that anyone who stands to throw that first stone merely in his act of judgment and in his act of accusation is themselves committing adultery by judging another. Now we have completed the 7th commandment and 3 remain. And perhaps you've noticed a trend that rather than judging, rather than blaming, punishing, or shaming, these commandments better serve us as guides to raise our consciousness, to lift our thinking to a higher way of thinking about ourselves. And when we think differently, when we think purely, when we think truly of who and what we are, then we have the eyes to see others the same way. These commandments can better serve us in affirming the divine truth for ourselves and for everyone else. These commandments have a way to encourage us to walk intimately with our divine on this spiritual journey that we call life. and always we remember to do all we do with love. Namaste.